Hello, and welcome to the LLG vlog, your fortnightly roundup of local government law and practice. You're with me, Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor, and as usual, Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance. Great to see you.
Nice to see you too, Dennis. Bit hot, but we won't dwell on that.
Indeed it is. Now, we've had some discussions in the last few days about the King's Speech, and whilst the King's Speech itself was a disappointment from the point of view of what it did not contain, and we've covered that elsewhere, there were a number of standout proposals, and one of them was the new social housing bill. Now, this is something we should look at. Social housing provision and the protection of the social housing stock is a key platform of the government's social housing policy. But the protections go far wider than this, and these new measures that have been introduced are specifically designed to protect the victims of domestic abuse.
Mm.
Now, from our members' perspective, every legal department has a right to buy legal team, or at least a conveyancing team that covers this important field. This is a topic of a special interest to them. In my day, I should mention the social housing went under the term council houses, but things are more complex these days, so we move on. So what we will look at today is what are the government's objectives with this new bill? What will the new bill actually do? How will the right to buy scheme itself change? And what about those disposals? Many of you who deal with these things will know what I mean. What are the new rules to do with disposals? And indeed, the central question that I raised at the beginning, what about domestic abuse in this
Mm.
context? What are the new provisions? And what about housing consents, another specialised area of this area of law? What is the plan with those?
Well, Dennis, let's look at the government objectives to start with, I think. So the government say that the social housing bill will protect much needed social housing stock, give affordable housing providers the clarity and confidence they need to build more social homes, and of course, better protect tenants who are the victims of domestic abuse by providing them with greater security and stability. And this guide explains the individual measures within the bill and how they will deliver these core objectives.
Yeah, the guide that's been introduced says that the social housing bill has three core objectives: to protect existing social housing stock and incentivize the building of more social homes, to protect social tenants who are victims of domestic abuse by providing greater housing security and stability, and finally to clarify the statute book and reduce unnecessary bureaucracy so providers can invest in new and existing homes with confidence.
Yes, and at the heart of the bill are comprehensive reforms to the right to buy, to deliver a fairer, better value, and more sustainable scheme. So, the right to buy scheme provides an important route for social housing tenants to own their own homes. However, many of the homes sold under the right to buy have not been replaced. That's been well reported. And this has, in consequence, depleted much needed social housing stock and reduced the motivation and confidence of councils to build and restrict broader investment into council housing.
Hmm. Now, following a public consultation back in 2024, the bill will reform the scheme to better protect the social housing stock and give councils the confidence to scale up the delivery of new social housing supply. Well, this is what the government hopes, while maintaining a route to home
Mm.
ownership for long-standing tenants. Now, these reforms will enable more households overall to have access to social housing, including those on waiting lists and those who are homeless.
Yeah. So, um, just take a look. I just want to take a look about how the scheme is changing, really, because the measures in the bill will increase the minimum I mean, these are quite large changes
Mm,
to what's gone before. It will increase
yes.
the minimum tenancy required to be eligible for the right to buy from 3 to 10 years. And this will better ensure, so says the government, that its tenants who have lived in and paid rent on their social homes for many years are able to own their own home through the scheme. And there will also be reformed discounts. So they're going to start at 5% of the property value and go up to a maximum of 15% or the cash discount cap, whichever is lower. And this will ensure that long-standing tenants benefit from a bigger discount.
And Helen, there'll be new provisions exempting newly built social and affordable homes for 35 years. This is all new. This
Mm.
will have no impact on existing tenants wanting to buy their current homes. And the key benefit of this is that it will increase councils' confidence to build in the first instance. This is what the government hopes. And there'll also be provisions exempting rural properties from the scheme, which will include homes in national parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty, and areas designated as rural, given that homes in these areas are particularly hard to replace due to land, planning, and supply constraints.
Well, exempting council homes for market rent from the right to buy will allow, so the plan is more cross subsidy for the building of social and affordable housing, preventing tenants who have previously benefited from the scheme from exercising the right to buy. There will, however, be exceptions for the victims of domestic abuse and in cases of irretrievable relationship breakdown. So it'll be interesting to see how that relationship breakdown, where the evidence lies in relation to that. If it's outside of domestic abuse, of course, there's a presumption in respect of domestic abuse. Increasing the period of time for which the council has the right to ask for repayment of all or part of the discount on the sale of property from 5 to 10 years. And this is designed to encourage people buying under the scheme to retain the property and discourage what's referred to as profiteering.
Yes, and there'll also be provisions to extend the period in which a local authority has the right of first refusal when a property previously bought under the right to buy is sold, so that it applies in perpetuity. And this will give councils, the government says, more opportunities to buy back homes previously sold under the scheme. And there are provisions supporting councils with the administration of the right to buy applications. As I said earlier, there'll be some bureaucratic relaxations. There'll be extensions to the length of the statutory notice timescales that practitioners will be fully aware of at the present time.
Yeah, and other measures to look out for provide for allowing the Secretary of State to determine the rules governing the spending of right to buy capital receipts through issuing a determination, which it has been provided for with the hope that it will result in administrative efficiencies for councils and central government, as it will no longer be necessary to issue a revised receipt retention agreement for all stock holding councils whenever the rules are changed, and also aligning the right to acquire scheme with the reforms to the right to buy, which should ensure that broad consistencies exist between the schemes. Discounts under the right to acquire will remain unchanged, with discounts for eligible tenants of 9,000 to 16,000 depending on the location.
And now we turn to those special provisions about disposals. What are the new rules there? Well, there is currently no statutory requirement for private registered providers of social housing to notify local authorities or other bodies in advance of selling a social home outside the social housing sector. Now, although in practice, some providers already choose to engage with local authorities or other social landlords ahead of disposals as a matter of good practice, this approach is not applied consistently across the sector, and that's going to change, Helen, as I think you'll explain.
Yes, because to build on this, sorry about the pun there, Dennis, and embed this good practice, the bill will establish a requirement for private registered providers to notify the relevant local authority and other private providers in their area before the disposal takes place, thereby giving these organisations the opportunity to consider whether they have any interest in purchasing the property.
Yeah, now let's turn to these new and very important provisions concerning
Yeah.
domestic abuse and social housing tenants. Current housing legislation has few protections for social housing tenants who are victims of domestic abuse that wish to remain in their home without their abuser. Landlords can evict perpetrators, but only in cases where the victim has already left their social home. This means that too often, according to the government, victims are forced to choose between staying in danger or losing their home.
Yes, so the government says that the bill will create a robust framework to enable landlords to take possession action against perpetrators of domestic abuse. And in doing so, the bill closes a long-standing gap in housing law that has left victims of domestic abuse with no safe way to keep their social home. And victims in social housing joint tenancies will be able to, well, the government says, remain safely in their home where possible, with the perpetrator removed through the courts. And where it's not safe or appropriate to stay, courts can ensure victims are offered suitable alternative social housing where available without, and this is the key, loss of security.
Yes, indeed. Now, the specific protections include stronger powers for landlords to enable them to take possession of a property where domestic abuse has taken place without the requirement for the victim to leave. And there'll be a new mechanism to facilitate the transfer of the joint tenancy into the sole name of the victim, where a victim wants to remain at the home as a sole tenant. And there'll be new powers to enable the courts to make an order to provide the victim with suitable alternative accommodation where it is not appropriate for the victim to remain in a home and the landlord has this accommodation available. Finally, there's a safeguard being introduced to ensure that perpetrators are unable unilaterally to end a joint tenancy in retaliation against possession action
Mm.
until proceedings have been concluded.
That's an
That'll be
important
important
one.
in practice. Yeah.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Let's take a look at housing consents. What's the plan there? Well, there are currently too many legal provisions, says the government, requiring councils to obtain the consent of the Secretary of State before disposing of or redeveloping their housing assets, even when that requirement serves no clear policy purpose. So in some cases, these requirements even apply to private owners of formal council homes, slowing sales and therefore obstructing the private rental market. Now, in two cases, the bill will remove the requirement for the Secretary of State to consent to the disposal of dwellings that have previously been owned by the local authority. So this consent has never been refused in practice, but it only slows down the housing market in these cases. So the bill will also use ministers' powers to broaden the existing exemptions to requirements to secure Secretary of State consent for the redevelopment of council housing assets.
Now, that was our breeze through all the complex technical provisions, and we round off with the usual question, well, what do others think about these proposals? Well, I think they are far-reaching, and
Mm.
there will be organisations central to all of this who will have a particular view. Now, Kate Henderson, Chief Executive of the National Housing Federation, said, at a time when 4.2 million people are in need of social housing in England, a huge number, we strongly support the government's aim to protect the country's social housing and welcome confirmation that the right to buy will not be extended to housing associations. And going on, she said, the outcome from the various measures the government is taking should mean that the right to buy is a much more sustainable scheme than it has been since 2012.
And the Chartered Institute of Housing welcomed to the government's what it called the government's ambitious legislative programme, Dennis. And Gavin Smart, who's the chief executive of the institute, said that, and I'll quote him: commitments on right to buy reform, stronger tenancy protections for domestic abuse survivors, capped ground rents, making common hold a viable alternative, and speeding up the remediation of unsafe cladding all signal a clear intent to improve residents' security, safety, and control over their homes.
And finally, Tracy Harrison, Chief Executive of the Northern Housing Consortium, said the social housing bill shows the government is giving providers the clarity and confidence to better protect and build more social housing by enacting the right to buy reforms. It also gives greater safety and security for tenants who are victims of domestic abuse. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that generally speaking, it gets a thumbs up, doesn't it,
It's been
from
well
those big
received all round,
organisations.
yeah.
Now, I thought we'd round off with some information because LLG has
Yeah.
a swathe of courses on housing. If you're a housing specialist, well, you might have just missed the housing law conference that took place at the top of the month. But we've got others coming forward. We've got other courses, including one on defending housing disrepair repair claims on the 7th of July. We've got succession law overview for local authority secure tenants. That's on the 9th of July. Helen, I think you know of some others.
Yes, we have. We've got access in housing cases. That's the 3rd of September. Antisocial behaviour junctions, still very much in the news, on the 24th of September. A right to buy workshop, so very apt, on the 17th of November. Plenty of time to plan for that.
Yeah.
And then possession proceedings and antisocial behaviour. And that's on the 3rd of December. And at some point, we will be running a premises closure orders course as well, but we've got to wait on the date for that.
Plenty there for practitioners or anyone coming into that particular sector. All the details, of course, are on the LLG website. So that's all for this episode. We'll see you next time for more legal insights and updates.